Okay, so get this. What if I told you that, like, your brain actually physically changes shape throughout the month?
Wow.
It's like having a tiny little sculptor in there constantly remodeling.
Hmm.
We are diving into the wild world of brain science today, how the menstrual cycle can actually reshape the brain. And we're basing this on a really interesting article from National Geographic. It's called The Menstrual Cycle Can Reshape Your Brain.
Yeah.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll know not only what these brain changes are, but like why they're such a big deal for women's health.
Yeah, it really challenges how we used to think of the brain as like this fixed and static organ.
Right.
And it really shows us that the brain is like incredibly dynamic. It's always changing and adapting, especially to things like hormonal fluctuations.
Right. And so the article actually opens with this med student, Elma Jashim, and she's super excited about her future career, but she's kind of dreading the emotional roller coaster of her upcoming cycle. I think, a lot of us can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just made me think, if it affects her so strongly every single month, imagine the effect over her lifetime. It's kind of crazy.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. I mean, most women go through nearly 450 cycles over like 30 or 40 years.
That's a lot of brain remodeling going on. I feel like, most people listening probably have a pretty good idea of how the menstrual cycle works, but could you maybe just give us a super quick recap focusing on, those key hormones that are at play?
Sure, yeah. So the cycle, which usually lasts somewhere between 25 and 30 days, it's all about getting the body ready for a possible pregnancy.
Sure.
It's almost like this perfectly timed dance with each hormone sort of taking the lead at different points.
Okay.
So it starts with menstruation, right? That's where the uterine lining is shed. Estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest levels at this point.
And then estrogen will surge, right, to like thicken the uterine lining.
Exactly, yeah. That surge in estrogen, it tells the uterine lining to thicken up and get ready for a fertilized egg to potentially implant.
Okay, so estrogen has set the stage. Then what happens?
Well, around the middle of the cycle, estrogen levels actually dip a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And that triggers ovulation, which is the release of an egg from the ovary. Then both estrogen and progesterone rise again to get that uterine lining super prepped for implantation.
Okay. And if pregnancy doesn't happen?
Then both estrogen and progesterone, they plummet.
Yeah.
And this causes the lining to shed, and then, bam, we're back at the beginning of a new cycle.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have got this intricate hormonal dance happening every single month.
We do.
But how does that actually lead to the brain reshaping itself?
Right. To understand that, we have to touch on a little bit of brain anatomy.
Okay.
The brain's made up of billions of these neurons. Picture each neuron like a tiny little tree.
Oh, okay.
The gray matter, that's like the bustling city center of your brain, it contains those neurons, and they're branch-like dendrites. Now, those dendrites, they have these tiny protrusions called spines. Think of them like leaves on a tree branch. Gray matter, super important for processing emotions, learning, and forming memories.
And then you have the white matter too, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's deep in the brain. Contains the neurons' axons, which are kind of like the tree trunk and roots connecting everything. White matter, think of it as the brain's superhighway.
Okay.
Transferring information between different regions.
So fascinating. Now, the hippocampus, that's that seahorse-shaped area of the brain. I know that's really important for memory. Is that where we start to see those effects of the hormonal dance that we were just talking about?
You are right on track, yeah.
Yeah.
The hippocampus, it's packed with hormone receptors, and it's incredibly adaptable. Like, it can actually grow in response to learning new skills.
So, like, if I learned how to juggle, my hippocampus could actually get bigger.
Exactly. There are studies showing that London taxi drivers who have to memorize just tons of spatial information, they actually have larger hippocampi than the average person.
So cool. Okay, so how does estrogen specifically fit into all of this?
Okay, so back in 1990, there was this groundbreaking study, and they found that estrogen, it actually regulates the density of those dendritic spines, those tiny little leaves on the branches that we talked about, specifically in the hippocampus of rats. This was huge.
Yeah.
Because at the time, estrogen was basically considered a reproductive hormone, and that was it.
So this research really kind of shifted our understanding of estrogen and the role it plays.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It opened up this whole new avenue of research on how sex hormones impact the brain. And more recent studies, they've used MRI technology and have actually been able to show that the human hippocampus, it actually changes in response to estrogen fluctuations during the menstrual cycle.
Wait, so they could actually see the brain changing shape? In real time? That is so wild. Okay, so what did they see happening to the hippocampus specifically?
Well, as estrogen levels rise, the outer layer of the hippocampus, it's called the dentate gyrus, it thickens and expands.
So more estrogen, bigger hippocampus. Is it that straightforward?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But different regions of the hippocampus, they respond to progesterone fluctuations as well. It's a complex interplay. We're just starting to, scratch the surface of all the nuances.
What about white matter, though? Does that change, too? Along with the gray matter?
There's a fascinating study that's still under review right now, but it suggests that it does. Researchers found that the structural properties of the white matter also fluctuate. They're in sync with hormone levels.
Interesting.
Especially right before ovulation.
Okay, so we've got both gray matter and white matter changing throughout the cycle. But the big question is, does all of this reshaping actually affect how we think and feel? Does having a larger hippocampus at certain points in the cycle actually translate to, better memory?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Honestly, we need more research to say for sure. These studies that we've talked about, they focused on healthy women who didn't report experiencing significant mood swings or cognitive changes. So while we're seeing these structural changes, we don't yet have a clear picture of how they connect to everyday experience.
That makes me think about all the women who do experience, really significant mood swings or other changes, throughout their cycle.
Yeah. It really highlights how much we still need to learn.
It really does. And that is where we are going to pick up in part 2.
Yeah, it's like we've been working with an incomplete map of the brain for way too long.
Right.
And now we're finally starting to fill in the gaps. And it's pretty exciting stuff.
It is exciting, but it's also a little frustrating that it took us so long to even start exploring these connections, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it definitely highlights this historical bias in research, right?
Yeah.
For decades, most studies used male subjects.
Yep.
And then they just took those results and generalized them to the whole population.
Yeah.
As if, the male body was the default human and the female body was just a variation.
Exactly. And that one-size-fits-all approach, it has been really detrimental to women's health.
Right.
It's led to misdiagnoses, ineffective treatments, and just a general lack of understanding of how women's bodies and brains actually work.
Right.
And in the case of the menstrual cycle, we're talking about a fundamental biological process that affects half the population. It's kind of mind-boggling that we're only now beginning to understand its full impact on the brain.
Yeah, it really is.
So much of the research we've discussed so far has focused on structural changes, the hippocampus getting bigger or smaller. But what about those less tangible changes, like the mood swings or the increased anxiety that some women experience at certain points in their cycle?
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are absolutely crucial aspects of
Yeah.
the menstrual cycle experience. And it's an area where more research is desperately needed.
Yeah.
While the studies that we've talked about, they didn't specifically look at mood or emotional changes. It's clear that we need to investigate those connections further.
Yeah. I'm also wondering about the impact of these cyclical brain changes on women's cognitive function. If estrogen is influencing the hippocampus and potentially leading to better memory at certain points in the cycle, are there other cognitive skills that might be affected as well?
That's a great question. And yeah, there's definitely potential for estrogen to, influence other cognitive processes too. For example, some research suggests that estrogen might play a role in things like verbal fluency and attention. But again, more research is needed to really understand those connections fully.
It seems like this research could have a huge impact on how we view conditions like premenstrual dysphoric disorder or PMDD.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. PMDD, that's a serious condition that causes severe mood swings and other really debilitating symptoms in the week or two before menstruation. If we can better understand how those hormonal fluctuations are impacting the brain, then we might be able to develop much more effective treatments for PMDD and provide better support for women who experience it.
And I'm also thinking about the societal implications too. If we better understood how these brain changes affect women's cognitive function and their emotional regulation, it could revolutionize everything from workplace policies to educational approaches.
Right, yeah.
I mean, imagine a world where menstrual leave is not just accepted, but actually understood as a necessary accommodation for the natural fluctuations in women's brains and bodies. It could drastically change how we support women's health and empower them to to thrive at every stage of their cycle.
Absolutely. It would be amazing to see that shift from simply managing symptoms, to really, really understanding what's happening in the brain, and then providing support based on that knowledge. It feels like this could be a real turning point in women's health.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's not just about women, right?
Yeah.
Understanding these brain changes has implications for everyone.
Exactly. It sheds light on just this fundamental interplay between hormones and brain function, which is relevant to all genders.
Right. So it could even lead to new insights into conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, which also involve hormonal changes as we age.
Yeah, definitely. And it could also help us, develop more effective treatments for mental health conditions that are influenced by hormones, like depression and anxiety, for example.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and I know our listeners are probably buzzing with thoughts and questions.
Yeah.
So before we move on to our final takeaway, what do you think is the most crucial point for our listeners to really grasp from all of this?
I think the key takeaway here is that the brain is not this static organ.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing and evolving, and it's influenced by a multitude of factors, including hormones.
Yeah.
And understanding these influences,
Yeah.
it's crucial for promoting optimal brain health for everyone, regardless of gender.
Right. And I love that. It's such a powerful message. This research is empowering. It allows us to advocate for ourselves, demand better research, and challenge those outdated notions about women's health.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it feels like we're really on the edge of some huge breakthroughs in women's health.
I agree. Yeah. It's about moving beyond just managing symptoms and really digging into those underlying mechanisms.
Right.
Imagine a future where we can actually predict and then kind of mitigate the cognitive and emotional challenges that some women face during certain parts of their cycle.
Right. Or being able to develop more personalized therapies that take into account all of these hormonal fluctuations.
Right. It's all within reach.
Mhm.
If we prioritize research on women's brain health,
Yeah.
and we keep pushing for a much deeper understanding of these really complex interactions.
So what does all of this mean for you, dear listener? Why should you care about, brains changing shape throughout the month?
This research is it's so empowering. It's about taking control of your own health and well-being. If you experience significant mood swings or cognitive changes throughout your cycle, don't just brush it off.
Yeah.
Talk to your doctor, ask questions, and seek out good information.
It's about advocating for yourself and demanding better care. And if you are, fascinated by this research, which I know I am, keep digging. Explore the resources that are available online. Look for organizations dedicated to women's brain health and stay curious.
Right. We've come a long way in understanding the menstrual cycle and the impact it has on the brain, but this really is just the beginning. There's just so much more to explore.
It's like we've been handed this key to unlock a much deeper understanding of ourselves and our potential.
Totally.
It's so exciting.
And the more we learn, the better equipped we're going to be to advocate for better research, better treatments, and better support for women everywhere.
I'm so excited to see where this new era of women's health research leads us. Until next time, keep diving deep.